We answer your mailbag questions and dive into a crossover Wednesday next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and here today we have a jam-packed episode, tons of content. The Ravens play the Miami Dolphins in Week 10 on Thursday Night Football, so for here on the show, it kind of throws the schedule off just a little bit. So we're going to be reverting back to the old way that we did crossovers a couple years ago and do a crossover Wednesday with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. And actually, my first ever crossover on the Locked On Podcast Network was with Locked On Dolphins. It was on Crossover Wednesday. It was with Travis Wingfield, who actually hosts the Dolphins podcast now, the official podcast of the Miami Dolphins. So good for Travis. It was really nice talking with him, and I'm really glad that he was able to make that next step in his career. But we'll be talking with Kyle today in the second and the third segment. In the first segment, though, we'll be diving into your mailbag questions. We have 6 of them. We'll be diving into all of them at this point. And also, we'll talk about the injury report for a little here, just briefly. So let's dive into it here. Before we do that, though, be sure to follow us both in audio and video form. If you're following along with us in audio, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow us. Also, if you're following along on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and like the video. It helps out with the algorithm. We're reaching for 1,000 subscribers. That's our goal here on the Locked On Ravens YouTube page. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at CashRecord34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into it here, though. We'll quickly start off with the injury report, so I'll just go through it really quickly. Latavius Murray with an ankle, did not practice. Patrick McCarry with an ankle, also did not practice. Marquise Brown, he has a back injury. He was a full participant. Sammy Watkins with a thigh is limited. Tavon Young with a knee is limited. Nick Boyle with a knee is limited. And Brandon Williams with a shoulder is limited. So for the Ravens, I do believe that they will probably get Nick Boyle back in this game. I think they'll get Sammy Watkins back. Tavon Young, I think that he'll play. And Brandon Williams, I think, should be good to go as well. We'll see. You know, all these things aren't set in stone yet, but with the injury reports having to come out now at the beginning of the week with a Thursday night game, again, it does throw stuff off. If Latavius Murray doesn't practice today, if he doesn't practice, it probably means he's not going to play on Thursday. Same thing with Patrick McCarry. I'd expect maybe those two to make a return in week 11. Now, McCarry, I think he could be out for a couple more weeks, and that high ankle sprains are very, they're tough. And for Latavius Murray, maybe his thing is the same way, but we'll see what ends up happening. So that's the injury report section, kind of going through it here. We'll talk more about the injuries, of course, with the mailbag and also with Kyle as well. Let's start off with a question in our mailbag, though, from DJ Chris Tharp, who asks, what's the deal with Iman Marshall? Can we have an in-depth dive and bio? Obviously, the team is still high on him. So, yeah, Iman Marshall's an interesting case. I will say Marshall was drafted in 2019 by the Ravens and 3 season-ending injuries in 3 seasons. He has not played a game in a very long time. He only has 1 total tackle in 3 seasons for the Ravens. The team really likes him, though. I feel like they want to use him more in like a hybrid corner safety role. We'll see, though, or maybe we won't. I mean, he has 1 more year on his deal left after this, but he really hasn't made an impact. He really just, I don't know. He was a good player at USC. That's where he came out of. He went to USC and was a really good player there and a high character guy as well, I've heard. So I think that the Ravens do want to see what they have in him, but he's just been so injury prone over his first 3 seasons that if there's a guy who comes in and potentially outperforms him in the preseason next year and training camp next year, we could see him just get flat out released, especially if he just can't stay on the football field, because that is a concern with him at this point. So I'm not saying that, the Iman Marshall era in Baltimore is over or anything, but, I do think that the Ravens will have some, decisions to make with Marshall in terms of just if he can play for a full 17-game season. We just haven't seen it yet so far this year. Our next 2 mailbag questions come from Eric Clark, who asks a couple good ones here. He first asks, how happy are you with Lamar maturing and changing plays at the line? And this is something I'm so happy about. I'm really excited to see this growth, and I am a very big advocate of that growth. And I know part of Lamar Jackson's growth and what people wanted to see from him was audibling at the line and making sure that he could identify the defense. And if he doesn't like what he sees pre-snap, he can make the calls to his players and say, hey, we're going to do this instead. And he's done that really well so far this season. Now, I think there's still room to grow for him in that regard, but I am very positive, or I think that the positive changes he has made in that regard have been really, really good. And it just helps the offense out in general. Jackson is a smart football player. We all know that. Now he's using that football smart to really go out there and not necessarily be baited in anything or to know that something's not going to be successful because he knows what's happening pre-snap. He is able to now diagnose the defense a lot better than he was as a rookie. He's shown tremendous growth since then, and he's now able to diagnose those plays. So I'm very excited to see what he can do as the season and as his career goes on. And the second question from Eric, would you rather see Brandon Stephens or Jimmy Smith replace Elliott? And honestly, Eric, I'm going to say both. I think it'd be good for them to have a rotation. Maybe we see Geno Stone in there as well. Maybe Trey Boston gets brought in. I think he'd be good. But yeah, I think a combination of both Stephens and Jimmy Smith. The Ravens, I think, are very high on Brandon Stephens, but obviously there's a bit of worry whenever you want to have a rookie player starting out, playing a really big role on a defense that is contending. And that's not saying that, Stephens is going to be bad because he's a rookie and he doesn't have the experience. He's a good football player and he's shown definite flashes, but there have been a couple miscommunications with him. And I do think that the Ravens overall have to kind of identify the talent they have on their roster, and they have a bunch of guys who can take over for Elliott. It's obviously a crushing blow to the defense, but I do think that Elliott, overall, his replacements will be able to get the job done. But of course, the Ravens would love to have Elliott out there, and I'm wishing him a very speedy recovery. Our next question here, it comes from Ron, and he asks, are you confident this offense will stop with the slow starts? Second question, do you think the running game will get better with guys like Ben Cleveland and Nick Boyle scheduled to come back? So a two-parter here by Ron, and yeah, I think the offense can stop with the slow starts. Now, one of the big things that we've seen, or at least I've seen out of this team in the first half, first quarter, the starts of their games, the third down offense has just not been there. Against Minnesota, they were 1 of 6. They were 2 of 10, I believe. It was just they weren't getting themselves into positive second and short situations. It was second and long, second and kind of medium. So I think that they really have to get it together there in the first half, first quarter, or wherever, and that will really help them with the slow starts because they are a good third and short team. They have been able to do that at a high clip over the last couple of seasons. It's been a bit lower this year because the losses of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, but I still do think that Baltimore has the talent to, of course, overcome those slow starts, and I think as the guys continue to get familiar with each other on offense, that will help out a ton. And the second part of Ron's question, I think the running game will get better with guys like Ben Cleveland and Nick Boyle scheduled to come back? I do. I definitely do. I think that's more of a Nick Boyle thing, though, than Ben Cleveland. No disrespect to Ben Cleveland whatsoever, but I just think that the overall talent Nick Boyle brings to the run game, the overall player that he is, what he means to this offense is so, so huge. He's like an extra offensive lineman who can catch the football. It's great to have a player like that on your roster. So when talking about Boyle and what he brings, him and Andrews, that duo together, put him in with Ricard as well, it's going to help a lot. And obviously, it's not necessarily like one player can make all the problems go away. The offensive line does have to play more consistently. I think Ben Cleveland could help with that. Ben Powers struggled a bit against Minnesota, but I do think that both players will have a positive impact for sure in the running game. Next, we have the American Stallion, who asks, with rushing on offense being an issue, what's something that coaches can change up to get it going more consistently? I know Nick Boyle is prepping to get back and should help, and Basher Ricard is getting worked in and looking good. And so, yeah, again, this goes back to offensive line, and I wanted to kind of ask these ones back to back because they go hand in hand with each other. Boyle is prepping to return. I think he will play in week 10. That's not confirmed, but I think he will. Yeah, I just think that getting themselves just more consistent offensive line play, especially from their tackles. Alejandro Villanueva is very inconsistent. He does have really good sets and really good reps, but he also has really bad sets and really bad reps. In Minnesota, against Minnesota, we saw that where he literally got driven back by a Vikings defender and just it was not great. So consistent tackle play is really huge. I think when Patrick McCarry comes back, that'll be big to this offense. The left guard position has been a bit right now, but also it's about the running backs and seeing what they can do. I think we're starting to see it with Freeman, with Bell. They impressed me against Minnesota. Hopefully when Latavius Murray comes back, he'll be doing well. But it is both ways. You know, the offensive line and the running backs both have to play a bit better. I think we saw some flashes against Minnesota, and I hope that they can do a really good job over the second half of the season because it is such a big part of their offense. And if their run game can click with the way the passing offense has played this season, I mean, they just play off of each other so well, and we'll start to see an offense that is much, much better rounded because we've seen it so far, but it will get even better if the run game can hit on all cylinders. And finally here, a question from DJ Big Will, who asks, when are we going to start using the 3 tight end sets that had the league terrified and caused matchup nightmares? And so, yeah, this is a question that I definitely would like to see the Ravens start to use a little bit more than 3 tight end sets. But at the same time, I think it's about personnel. You know, the Ravens have been working with Mark Andrews, Eric Tomlinson, and Josh Oliver for this year. And not a knock on those 2 players, but they're not Hayden Hurst and Nick Boyle. You know, the way that the Ravens were striking fear into their opponents was with that power running style with Mark Ingram in the backfield, the 2019 Mark Ingram. And, you know, you had other players in that backfield that were really good. Lamar Jackson, obviously, is a running quarterback doing really well, that dual threat player who could run and throw the football at a high rate. Also, the offensive line played really well that year for the most part. And the tight ends played a huge role in that with Andrews and Hurst and Boyle. You just don't have the same personnel anymore. And that's why the Ravens have been looking to find that third tight end, whether it is Oliver or somebody else. Maybe they'll draft one in 2022. We'll see. But with Boyle coming back, it gives them more leeway, I guess, to use that. Tomlinson's played well this season, but he's not Nick Boyle. Oliver's played decently well this year as well, but he's not a Hayden Hurst player. So right now, the reason that those teams in 2019 or that team in 2019 was striking fear into the opponents was because of the personnel that they had with the pass catching weapons as well as the run block threats. So they have to get back to that a little bit. And plus the offense has just changed overall. You know, this isn't the same offense that we saw in 2019. So they're not necessarily relying on those as much, but it was really fun back in 2019 to see those offenses, just the ground and pound style, but the personnel has changed. The offense has changed. So potentially they could get back to it in 2021 and maybe even as we look to the future in 2022. But for now, they don't necessarily need to rely on it as much because the passing offense is much more consistent this season than it was in recent years. We're going to head into our first break, though. When we get back, we're going to be diving into Crossover Wednesday with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. So stay tuned for that. And we will be right back. Hey, Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about in Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code Touchdown and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill-up. That's up to 50 cents a gallon cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code Touchdown to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code Touchdown to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code Touchdown. It is Crossover Wednesday here on the Locked On Podcast Network with Locked On Ravens and Locked On Dolphins. Kevin Oestreicher, Locked On Ravens, here with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. With the Ravens and the Dolphins playing on Thursday, we had to get the crossover in a day early here on the network. Kyle, this game, Baltimore's 4th primetime matchup of the year. The Dolphins obviously going through a bit of a disappointing stretch. The Ravens 6-2 at the top of the AFC North. How are you doing today?
I'll tell you what, Crossover Wednesday doesn't quite have the same ring to it as Crossover Thursday, but that's okay. You know, we don't have to wait any extra days to get our football game in this weekend. And things are going well. We've got our first victory Monday in about 7 weeks with the Dolphins. So that's a nice, refreshing change versus what has just been a disaster season. And obviously, Dolphins fans and Ravens fans are well aware of the track record when these two teams have played each other in recent years. So maybe this is, I mean, they played Buffalo tough for a half the week prior to the Houston game. Our defense gave their best effort. So maybe this is going to be the build to a competitive game. I'm sure Lamar, obviously coming home, is going to be real juiced up and ready to go too. So some storylines to watch at the very least.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you mentioned the recent history between these two teams. Baltimore outscoring Miami 137-16 over the last 3 meetings. Baltimore's won 8 of the last 9. But Kyle, I think we have to start off with the quarterback situation in Miami right now. Is Tua Tagovailoa has been limited throughout the week so far. If he's not able to go, it'll be Jacoby Brissett. At this point, Kyle, which quarterback would you feel more confident in beating the Ravens with Tua being a little bit banged up and Jacoby Brissett waiting in the wings?
Well, it's odd because the justification for not playing Tua, but yet dressing him to be the backup, is he can't push the ball down the field. Like, he doesn't have like 5 pass attempts that have gone beyond 25 air yards downfield throughout the course of this season anyway. And he supposedly injured that middle finger on his throwing hand in the second quarter against Buffalo, and then went on late in the game to complete the longest air yards completion of his career to Mike Gesicki. So I don't really know what the heck's going on as far as the dynamics are at play here. I would say the style of play of the offense is better suited to Tua Tagovailoa. And I think his decision-making process, his quick trigger, his footwork, those are things with a shaky offensive line. Let's just call it that and be nice. You can make quicker decisions. The give and take there, of course, is if the defense is going to cap those routes and really crowd the line of scrimmage, can you extend plays with your legs, get outside the pocket or step up into the pocket and then find receivers? So I think Tua, with his accuracy, his decision making, and his short area quickness, does give the Dolphins offense the best chance to survive the shaky offensive line play. We'll see if they end up playing Jacoby Brissett. You'll know pretty early on based on the plays that they're calling. You know, if it was a Tua game plan and they expected him to play, you're going to see a lot of play action, a lot of RPOs. If it's Jacoby Brissett, I think you'll see a little bit more empty, traditional drop back style passing concepts.
Yeah, and regardless of which quarterback is back there for Miami on Thursday, you mentioned that offensive line. Kyle, just what is going on in Miami right now with that offensive line? It just has not been a good unit this year. And it seems like that, they have talent on the line. They invested a high pick in Liam Eichenberg. They have Robert Hunt and a couple others, but it just hasn't been a good unit. So what do you attribute to the really, really slow start this unit has had this year?
Developing quarterback with developing parts in the offensive line, and a developing offensive line coach and developing offensive coordinators. They're offensive coordinators. This is their third and fourth offensive coordinators in 3 years under Brian Flores. Co-offensive coordinators. Very unique situation. The offensive line coach is their fourth offensive line coach in 3 years under Brian Flores. And Coach Lem is a first-time offensive line coach working with, they had 7 guys on the roster at the start of the season that were first, second, or third-year players, and none had more than 16 career starts out of that group of guys. So very young, very inexperienced. I would say if you're looking for a highlight on this line, Robert Hunt, the right guard, who was drafted in the top 40 in the 2020 draft. They've kicked him inside to play guard this year after playing tackle in 2020. He's been very good, but he's on an island by himself, and he gets lost a little bit because the guy next to him, Jesse Davis, is one of 3 Dolphins players on this offensive line that are tied for the most pressures conceded in the NFL, along with Austin Jackson, who did not play week 1 against New England and is still somehow at the top of the charts, and Liam Eichenberg, who I at least am willing to give them a little bit of flexibility, because Miami drafted him. He was a career left tackle, and they converted him to right tackle to start minicamp. And then Solomon Kinley showed up overweight at training camp, so they moved him inside the left guard to try and cross-train him there, and then he was back to right tackle. Then Austin Jackson got COVID and couldn't play week 1, so then he plays left tackle. Then he's back to right tackle, and 3 weeks later, they insert him at left tackle. And it's like, guys, this is not how you're going to develop a starting offensive lineman. You just got to let the guy get some reps. So I'm at least willing to be a little bit more patient with Liam Eichenberg. But yeah, they bungled just about everything for a development perspective on this offensive line.
Yeah, and the Ravens going through it a bit with their tackle situation as well, having Alejandro Villanueva move from the left side to the right side. Then Ronnie Stanley gets injured again. He's back from the right side to the left side, but it's a lot different with a young player like Liam Eichenberg, who I agree, you just have to get him snaps at one position, but not keep moving them, week in and week out. But Kyle, this Dolphins offense does have some weapons on it. You mentioned Mike Gesicki and Jalen Waddle. Their high invested first round pick has also showed some flashes as well. But who are some other underrated pass catching weapons that Tua has to throw the football to that you could be looking out for on Thursday?
Yeah, well, we'll see if Devontae Parker's able to play. He's battling his annual hamstring issue that seems to cost him 4 games every year. And he's missed more time than that this season. Mac Hollins is a career special teams guy, but he has taken at least some positive steps and can be a reliable possession type receiver. We'll see if Preston Williams is going to play. He's been inactive the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, it was because of disciplinary reasons. Apparently, this past week, they elevated a guy, Kirk Merritt, off the practice squad because they wanted to get him special teams reps, which Preston Williams can't do. So it's going to be the Mike Gesicki, Jalen Waddle, and Myles Gaskin show as far as catching is. Gaskin out of the backfield. They do go empty and put him out wide. They like to push a vertical route from the slot and have him fold underneath and try and get some run after catch opportunities when they're looking for that man zone indicator. So I think those three guys, unless Devontae Parker suits up for this game, which I'd probably be surprised because he didn't play on Sunday and it's a short week, are where you're going to see the vast majority of the passing offense go.
And you talk about Devontae Parker and the yearly hamstring. Well, Sammy Watkins in Baltimore has been known for some of his injury proneness over his career, and he's dealing with an injury of his own, potentially able to play on Thursday, but we'll see, just like with Parker in Miami. But Kyle, moving on to the defense, the Dolphins do have some talent, but what would you classify as some of the strengths and weaknesses of the unit?
I think they are very effective up front with controlling the line of scrimmage. They are a gap control defense. They don't ask their guys to do a lot of penetration. When they get into third downs, it's a lot of schemed pressures and twists and stunts in games. So it's not like they're going to have a lot of success with organic rush, bringing 3 or 4 guys, having everybody just penetrate a gap. And I don't think that's going to be the game plan for against Lamar Jackson anyway. I think they're going to try to box the pocket, contain rush, see if they can get some free runners with the secondary. They've got 2 young safeties in Brandon Jones and Javon Holland, who are really playing at a high level right now. They're one of the few bright spots. The Dolphins got Jerome Baker, the linebacker that got a big contract extension this past offseason after a career year last year, back against Houston. He's not been quite the same, but I think they have probably a little bit too much on his plate when you think about Kyle Van Noy departed in the offseason, and they replaced him with a rookie in Jalen Phillips, and Shaq Lawson left in the offseason. Jerome Baker's kind of the guy that, hey, we want to keep 2 linebackers on the field and run nickel. You're going to go here, you're going to go here, you're going to go all over the place. And I think sometimes that puts him in positions that he plays where the team needs him to, but not necessarily where he's best suited. And then if Xavier Howard shows up to play and is fired up to play on primetime, he's obviously the star of the show. He's been a little erratic this year. He's given up some touchdowns and not played anywhere near the standard that he set last year. So that's kind of some of the prominent guys and trends with this Dolphins defense to keep an eye for.
Yeah, and I think part of it, with the Lamar Jackson led offense, you never know what you're going to get, but you do know you have to play disciplined football on the defensive side of the ball, contain your gaps. And now with the Ravens passing game being really good this season, it only adds another element that really is improved. But Kyle, with the coaching staff, you mentioned a bit about the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, obviously Brian Flores, the head man there. How impressed or not have you been with the entire Dolphins coaching staff this year based off what you were expecting from this team?
Almost zero, for being honest. They're very high expectations. The team overachieved in each of the first 2 years. They were getting UDFAs and guys off the waiver wire, and they were developing these guys and bringing these guys along quite well. And then it's like hiring teeth trying to find an offensive coordinator, come in and run the offense. They seemed like they alienated Chan Gailey. Chan Gailey was the OC last year and said over the course of the summer, he found out with all of us on TV when the Dolphins made a quarterback change, and he wasn't a part of that decision-making process or informed of it ahead of time. So I don't know if perhaps there's kind of a scarlet letter here with that job or not. Obviously, they've been churning through guys. But even like Marion Hobby's the defensive line coach, he left this offseason to take the exact same job somewhere else. Not promotion, just left. And there's kind of some whispers that Coach Flores is pretty tough on his assistants. And you look at the staff that he's got in year 3, and it's a bunch of younger guys, bunch of guys from the college ranks. It's like, okay, like kind of the writing's on the wall here that something's a foul and something's amiss. And I think the Dolphins on the field are really paying the price for that. And as you look to project this team forward, I think that's one of the big red flags about potentially staying the course is what's going to change this offseason that's going to get you to get all these hires right that you seem to miss on and had to dip into the youth pool to fill vacancies this past year. And I don't really have that answer.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Dolphins are able to respond this offseason and just what they'll be able to do with their coaching staff. But, maybe Flores is the guy for the job. Maybe he's not. But I think even in the second half of the year, we'll find out a lot about the Miami Dolphins for sure. But we're going to head into our final break. When we get back, we're going to flip things, and Kyle's going to be asking me questions about the Ravens. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you are missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars are chalky, waxy, or just plain hard to choke down. The Built Bar is soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience, one that you'll enjoy. In fact, you'd swear you're eating a candy bar. Built Bars are low carb, low calorie, low fat, low sugar, and high in protein. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
And we are back on a crossover Wednesday with Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Ravens. Get a chance to put Kevin under the gun here a little bit and grill him on this Baltimore Ravens team. And Kevin, I think the first thing that I have to ask you is Lamar Jackson, obviously. Very familiar with the South Florida area, and he's getting a chance to come home. And he kickstarted his MVP campaign in 2019 with an excellent performance against the Dolphins in week 1 of that year. What has been the biggest change for Lamar since Miami last saw him in 2019 to where he is at now at the midway point in 2021?
Yeah, Kyle, I think growth is the big word, and it's just in multiple areas where he was expected to take such a huge leap from year 3 to year 4. And we're now seeing him just look a lot calmer in the pocket. He looks more poised in the pocket. And I know that all the narratives surrounding him have been, oh, he can't come from behind and he can't throw the ball. And if you stop the run, the Ravens lose. And, because they can't throw. But all those narratives, they were kind of busted long before. But he's shown this year, whether it's the comeback win against Indianapolis or Minnesota or Kansas City, he just knows how to lead a football team. And not that he didn't know that before, but I think what we saw in week 1 of 2019 against Miami was, pure, just domination flat out. But at the same time, throughout that season, the Ravens never really were tested a ton. They went through a couple rough stretches, but they dominated most of their opponents. This season, we've seen Lamar Jackson go through a lot of adversity on the football field, whether it has been tough starts. The Ravens are a slow starting team this season, but he's not relying as much on his legs. He trusts his arm now. He can roll out, find the receivers. He's working with a better receiving core this year, which helps him with Marquise Brown, Rashad Bateman, and maybe Sammy Watkins for Thursday. But I do think that Jackson has just shown continuous growth, and that's been the biggest part of his game this year because, he could have been content with that MVP, and all of a sudden he's just like, oh, look, I proved myself, we're done. But he is hungry, and he strives for greatness, and he's shown that so far through these first 9 weeks.
So, you mentioned adversity, and I think about the injuries that Baltimore has taken on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, the departure of Orlando Brown Jr. this off straight to Kansas City as well. So a lot of new pieces, and obviously the running back situation in which Dolphins fans had eyes for J.K. Dobbins, and Baltimore grabbed them 1 pick before in the second round of that 2020 draft, and a lot of upset and turnover from what the depth chart was at the beginning of the year for Baltimore. So how have they best been able to rejuvenate the running game outside of Lamar Jackson and obviously the threat that he has and the decision-making process that he has at the mesh point to be able to add an extra gap in the run game with the threat of his legs to the outside?
Oh, yeah, it's been tough for sure. I mean, you mentioned it, the Ravens losing every yard, carry, touchdown from running backs on their 2020 roster. Mark Ingram was in Houston, now he's in New Orleans, and then they lose Dobbins, Edwards, and Justice Hill for the season, so they go out, and this wasn't like it happened like a month or 2 before the regular season starts, so you have time to sign guys and get them acclimated. This happened like 10 days, a week before the regular season starts. They have to pivot super quickly. They signed Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, Le'Veon Bell. And at the beginning, I think we saw just how important J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are to this Ravens team. And I know the running back position is a bit undervalued, where once they hit a certain age, all of a sudden it's time to go. There's that running back age of 30. But, you lose so much with Dobbins and Edwards, and all of a sudden you have Le'Veon Bell and Freeman and Murray, and this isn't 2016, so they've lost a couple steps. But we saw, and I think I've seen at least in recent weeks, there's been growth from them. Devonta Freeman started off slow. You mentioned the mesh point. There were a couple miscommunication errors just because they were learning. They were learning at a very rapid rate in a very short amount of time to start this season out. Murray, they kind of use in a Gus Edwards role. He's more of a power guy, north-south runner, can also catch some passes out of the backfield. Devonta Freeman's more of that third down back, but can also be used on first and second down, but he is a threat out of the backfield as a receiver. And then Le'Veon Bell kind of gets carries here and there. For example, in week 7 against Cincinnati, Lamar Jackson averaged 7.3 yards per carry on the ground. The non-Lamar Jackson ball carriers averaged 2.3. So they really needed to get something going. And I think in week 9 against Minnesota, they got it. They have guys averaging a couple yards per carry over maybe what it actually is on tape, because Devonta Freeman has a long run at the beginning of the year. That kind of skews the numbers. But I think that now that they've been in the offense for a month or two, They're kind of getting their roles established. I think now what we're seeing is with Jackson, they're just getting more chemistry with him. And in the offense, they're being more comfortable within their roles.
One of the dynamics that I really enjoyed about that 2019 offense was the depth of the tight end room and how much they used when Hayden Hurst was still in the building to go along with Mark Andrews and then Nick Boyle, who my wife actually went to school with. So that's a fun little connection that I have. I'll always root for Nick. She said he's a real nice guy. So, what has the personnel usage looked like this year as far as 12 personnel? Do they dip into 13? Are they more 22 than they are 3 tight ends? How are they making the most of, obviously Rashad Bateman's come back in the last couple of weeks to give you a little extra juice in the passing game. Has that changed what you've seen from a personnel and formation standpoint for Baltimore at all?
A little bit. I do think, so Boyle hasn't even played this season. It's likely he's going to make his debut against Miami here in week 10. But with Boyle and even with Sammy Watkins out, we really haven't seen the Ravens offense at like full strength in terms of personnel usage.
Mm-hmm.
They have had Eric Tomlinson kind of playing a Nick Boyle role, so they will dip into 3 tight end sets, but it's not the same without Boyle and Hayden Hurst, who's not in Baltimore anymore. He's in Atlanta. So they will use it. They also like to use Patrick Ricard. They don't use him in line, though. They use him as like a traditional fullback. They like to use motion at the line as well. They'll motion him across the field. Even with like jet sweeps to Devin Duvernay, they'll have him in there. But they tend to like to go heavy, especially in third and short situations. And I mean, third and short, which team does it? But I think overall, with Sammy Watkins back in the fold, we will see a lot more 3 receiver sets, maybe even some 4 receiver sets, because Baltimore's wide receiver room is just so deep this year. They've used Devin Duvernay a lot in that role. James Prochet also, he's been up and down with his snap usage. But I think that in this game against Miami, if we see Baltimore get out to a big lead, they'll start just trying it, especially in the second half, to play ball control offense, which in turn will probably have them using more 3 tight end sets. Maybe they'll go 2 and have Ricard in there as well, because Ricard is their Swiss Army knife. He had a huge game against Minnesota, a huge drive against Minnesota. So I think that with Boyle back, with Watkins back, we'll start to really see what this offense likes to do, because they've showed hints of it, but we haven't actually seen it with everybody healthy.
So on the defensive side of the ball, obviously Odafe Owe has been a nice addition amid the loss of Matt Judon in free agency to the New England Patriots this past offseason. What other new faces in this Baltimore Ravens defense? Obviously, there's some changes in the secondary with Marcus Peters going down before the start of the season as well. So what are some of the other new faces that Miami needs to be aware of that have been playing at a high level thus far this season?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, Kyle, because for the Ravens offense, they added a bunch of new faces, but for the defense, you mentioned Odafe Owe, they really didn't add a ton. Justin Houston was their big addition, the outside linebacker. He has played a lot, and he's been great as a veteran presence for guys like Owe and Tyus Bowser and some of those players. But they didn't really go out and add a ton of new faces outside of the draft and Justin Houston. They lost Matthew Judon. They lost Yannick Ngakoue. They decided to draft Owe and Dalen Hayes out of Notre Dame to replace those 2, and Hayes is on injured reserve, so he hasn't played in multiple weeks. But now you mentioned with Marcus Peters going down, Anthony Averett, who is a 4th-year corner, has stepped up to the plate. Outside of Indianapolis, has had a very strong season overall. He's in a contract year, so he's earning himself a little bit of money this season. DeShon Elliott goes down last week. He tore his pec and his bicep and played through it somehow. Ended up having to leave the game, but he's a tough guy. The Ravens will have to lean on a rookie, it seems like, for now, in Brandon Stevens out of SMU, who was a running back at UCLA and then transferred. So he's had a journey in terms of positions, was a corner at SMU. So he's going to be, I think, their main guy. They'll also try to rotate in Jimmy Smith at safety, who they like to use more as a hybrid now instead of just a pure corner. Ardarius Washington is a safety, but they like to use him, I think, as a slot guy. I think they don't love his long speed, so they view him more as a slot. So maybe Geno Stone is a player who steps up and plays a bigger role out of Iowa, a second-year guy for them. So they didn't necessarily add a ton of new faces. They relied on the jumps of players like Patrick Queen, which so far has been a very, very mixed bag. He struggled to start the season quite a bit, has moved into a new role, and ultimately now is playing better. But that's because of Josh Bynes, who was their midseason, or I guess before the year addition, was cut from Carolina. The Ravens bring him back for his 3rd stint. He's inserted in the starting lineup, and he's playing like he's 23 again. He looks fast, he looks spry, energetic, and has really provided a veteran presence. So I think out of everybody, you mentioned Owe, who's played great. He's kind of disappeared over the last few weeks, though. Josh Bynes has been the savior of this Ravens defense because they've struggled in some areas, but Bynes has kind of brought them back.
And there's no shortage, clearly, with the last 20-something minutes of interesting storylines, despite the fact that you've got teams on different ends of the spectrum here, with Baltimore coming in, looking to maintain a lead in the AFC North, and Miami trying to climb out of the basement, surprisingly competing with the New York Jets down there at the bottom of the AFC East. That is going to do it for this crossover Wednesday edition on the Locked On Network with Locked On Ravens and Locked On Dolphins. We thank you all for listening, and make sure you stay plugged into your respective shows, your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Thanks for listening.